Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy David, and I'm coming at you with another episode of the Free Play Mode. It is July 15th, 2015, and I'm sure you've heard the news by now, unless you've been living in a cave or in a hole somewhere, that Nintendo president Satoru Iwata has passed away due to a tumor in his bile duct. And it's just sad that the man has died, and I'm not going to get into a whole spiel about what the man has done for Nintendo because there are 50 million videos out there already that have already covered this subject, this man's legacy, this, that, and the other. If you want to watch one of those videos, I recommend you go watch Alpha Omega Sin's video, or Rich from Review Tech USA's video, or even Broken Games HD's video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be truthful. I'm going to discuss where does Nintendo go from here. I'm going to look at the matter objectively, and I'm not going to sugarcoat things. So if you're a diehard Nintendo fanboy, or if you think I'm about to disrespect the memory of Satoru Iwata by speaking ill of him, I advise you to turn off this video now. Okay, good, you're still here. So here's what the deal is. Before Iwata's death, many people were calling for him to step down as the president of Nintendo because, let's face facts, while the man does have a great legacy at Nintendo, he's partially the reason why they're in the funk that they're in right now. Like from a home console's perspective. Like, the Nintendo Wii U is not selling at all. The Nintendo Wii was lightning in a bottle, and when Satoru Iwata came on as president, the GameCube wasn't doing all that hot either. So you have 2 out of the 3 consoles that were essentially under Iwata's watch not doing very well, and as a result, he lost a lot of consumer confidence from the core gamers, and the casuals that he did pick up with the Nintendo Wii are not following with the Nintendo Wii U. So the problem is that Iwata's vision of video gaming in the 21st century was very old and outdated. He, like many others at the top of Nintendo, think that gaming as it exists today exists as it did in the 1980s and the mid 1990s, and that's just not the case anymore. You have to deal with internet online presence, you have to deal with high capacity optical media, you have to deal with digital distribution, and you have to deal with hardware that is powerful enough to allow developers to fully envision what they have in their minds and what they plan out during the development process of these games without being underpowered to the point where a developer can't put his or her vision onto your console. And the last thing is gimmicky hardware. The key in that regard is to be unique enough to stand out, but not so unique that it alienates people or developers from making games on your console. So where does Nintendo go from here? Forward and up, hopefully. It's long been said that, as I said previously, Iwata was one of the main reasons why Nintendo is in its current situation from a customer confidence perspective and a developmental perspective for its home consoles. Like mobile handhelds, they're killing it. Game Boy, 3DS, they're just knocking it out the park left and right, but for some reason they just don't seem to have that 21st century vision of gaming when it comes to a home console perspective. So what they need to do going forward is they need to install a person that has a clear vision of what gaming is today and what it will eventually become over the next 5 to 10 years, because gaming will change drastically in the next 5 to 10 years, whether people want to believe it or not. And I'm not talking from a hardware perspective, I'm talking from a logistical perspective. So this is what I think needs to happen. They need to appoint a younger person, a non-Japanese person, to the head of Nintendo, because right now Japan, their gaming focus overall is moving away from the home console market, while the rest of the world, Europe, North America, and South America, and even new markets in China, they're booming in the home console market. So the next head of Nintendo needs to realize that this is what gaming is. It's powerful hardware. It's an online presence. And I'm not talking about, oh, we'll have a few games that have some online features. I'm talking about robust online services like Xbox Live and PlayStation Network, because and Steam. That's another area where video game is heading, because digital distribution and robust online network go hand in hand these days. So that's another area where Nintendo needs to really step it up, and their next head needs to have that vision complete in their head going forward. Another area where Nintendo needs to step it up and the next head of Nintendo needs to focus on is hardware. They need to release hardware that is powerful enough to where they won't be getting watered down ports of third-party developers' games, or developers simply choosing not to develop for the Nintendo console at all. They need to have their hardware on par or better than Microsoft and Sony's. They need to modernize, for lack of a better term. That's where they need to go. They need to become more modern in their thinking in terms of home console hardware. And I get that people like, well, Nintendo's always been unique and they've never had the most powerful hardware out there in the home console market. And I have to disagree with you, because if you've been around the home console industry long enough, and if you go back far enough, you'll see that Nintendo's hardware has been relatively powerful up until the Nintendo Wii. Let's go back to Nintendo's first piece of hardware, which was the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was slightly more powerful than the Sega Master System, and it was very much more powerful than the Atari 7800, which were its two main competitors at the time. And then you move on to the next console that Nintendo put out, which was the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom, depending on where you came from. The Super Nintendo, was way more powerful than Sega's offering, which was the Sega Genesis / Sega Mega Drive at the time. Even with Sega's add-ons, which were the Sega CD and the Sega 32X, the Super Nintendo was still more powerful than those systems from a technological standpoint, and the games reflected that. And then this is where Nintendo sort of starts to go into a spiral when it comes to hardware, because even though the Nintendo 64 was more powerful than the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn, the medium in which they chose to put the games out on, cartridges as opposed to CDs, which Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation put their games out on, the N64 hardware was more powerful. It just was hindered by cartridges, and that was a bad move. So we fast forward to the Nintendo GameCube, and the Nintendo GameCube was more powerful than the Xbox and PlayStation 2. The problem was again the medium in which they chose to put the games out on, because they chose proprietary optical discs, those little tiny discs that were slightly more spacious than a CD, but not as much space as a DVD. Whereas Xbox games and PlayStation 2 games came on DVDs. So you had more space to work with, even though the systems were not as powerful as Nintendo's offering. And that's what hampered developers. They didn't have enough space to put their games on the Nintendo GameCube's discs. So then we move on to the first instance where Nintendo decides to go in a totally different direction with their hardware, because they want to make money right out of the box, and they release the Nintendo Wii, which is less powerful than the Xbox 360 and less powerful than the PlayStation 3. So Yes, the Nintendo Wii was lightning in a bottle and it sold an assload of consoles, but it was a double-edged sword because while the Nintendo Wii was unique and it sold a lot of consoles, it attracted mainly casuals who had never gamed before in their lives based on the strength of Wii Sports. And I'll have to admit, my mom has a Nintendo Wii and she hasn't touched it in almost 6 years now because she got it based on the strength of Wii Sports. It was like, hey, that looks good. I want to play that. She went, dropped $150 on a Nintendo Wii, played Wii Sports for about a month and a half, hasn't touched it since. And that's pretty much the story with the vast majority of Nintendo Wii owners outside of the core gamers. They maybe have one or two games outside of Wii Sports. They may have Wii Fit and they may have the sequel to Wii Sports, but that's it. The average Nintendo Wii owner only owns 5 games, whereas the average Xbox 360 owner owns roughly 8 games, and the average PlayStation 3 owner owns 7 games. So there's a vast disparity there between Nintendo Wii and its competitors in Sony and Microsoft. So then we go to the Nintendo Wii U, and they do such a bad job of marketing it that a lot of people get it confused for simply an add-on for the Nintendo Wii. In addition, that it's even though it's more powerful than an Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 by the time it's released roughly a year before Microsoft and Sony come out with their next generation consoles, which is the current generation now, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. So now Nintendo Wii U is getting backlog of Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 titles, which people have already played to death at this point. I'm talking Mass Effect 3 and I'm talking Batman Arkham City. People have played those games to death by the time they were released on the Nintendo Wii on their Xbox 360s and PlayStation 3s, and there was really no incentive to purchase the game again for a slight graphical upgrade and second screen experience via the Nintendo Wii U's controller. So that's the problem Nintendo faces going forward, is that they need a president with a clear 21st century vision of what gaming is today and what it's going to become. I want to know your thoughts on this. Leave a comment in the comment section below, or if you're feeling creative, make a video response. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down it. And please share this video with your friends and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. This is David from the Free Play Mode signing off. Hoping you have a good evening. Peace, folks. I'm out.